For today's webinar, we are really lucky to have Christine Cauwels, who is the Clinical Director of Therapy at Cerebral, which is a mental health app. But Christine is also a licensed clinical mental health counselor, has over 19 years experience. And this is going to be an open conversation webinar today. So Christine will have a little presentation at the beginning, and then we're going to leave it really open to questions. So as always, put your questions in the Q&A. We had some come in during registration, so we'll get to those as well, but definitely feel free to, we want this to be open. Christine, with all of her years experience, has, I think, heard everything. So, please feel free to ask any question that comes to you. I will not use anyone's names. You can always put your questions in anonymously as well, but I don't use any names anyway. And so the Q&A box will be there for you to put any questions or comments, and feel free if you need, or if you prefer closed captioning, you should be able to put that on at the bottom as well. So that's all I have to say. That was like in one breath. So I'm going to stop my sharing, and I'm going to welcome in Christine, who, again, thank you so much for coming and chatting about this important topic. And I'll just pass it off to you.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. Let me get my screen sharing going here. All right. As Sarah said, my name is Christine Cauwels. I am a licensed clinical therapist, mental health counselor in 3 states. And I've been doing this for over 20 years now, licensed for not quite 20 years. And we kind of went through all this. I am licensed in Illinois, Iowa, and North Carolina, and I currently live in North Carolina, although my family is originally from New York. So New York is near and dear to my heart. So first off, what is mental illness? The National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, defines mental illness as a medical condition that disrupts a person's thinking, feeling, mood, ability to relate to others, and daily functioning. I can't stress enough, mental illness is nothing to be ashamed of. It is a condition just like any other condition. We take care of our bodies, and our brains are part of the body. So that is my focus whenever I'm speaking with any group or my clients, that the brain is part of the body. So we need to take care of it the same way we would take care of an appendix or a foot. There's nothing to be ashamed of the fact that the illness is striking that part of the body. There are 3 common types of mental illnesses. The most common that we hear of are the mood disorders. And that's when you're talking about major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, seasonal affective disorder, and premenstrual dysphoric disorder. They're characterized by disruptions in emotions that cause significant impairment in daily functioning. And that's when you get to the clinical level of a mental illness, is when you are experiencing clinically significant impairment in your daily functioning. So that's something to keep in mind. You may go to a mental health provider for a mental health condition, and they might not diagnose you with one of those conditions because you might not meet the criteria. That doesn't mean that you're not experiencing issues and couldn't benefit from care, but you might not be diagnosed with maybe what you thought you might be when you showed up. Anxiety disorders are on the rise, unfortunately, in our society, starting with children all the way through elderly adults. Anxiety disorders are characterized by feelings of worry, anxiety, and fear. And once again, they're strong enough to interfere with one's daily activities. And the most common anxiety disorders are generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, agoraphobia, social anxiety disorder, or specific phobias. Those are the folks that might have a very significant fear of spiders, for example. And as with mood disorders, anxiety disorders are very treatable with both medication and therapy. And then finally, trauma-based disorders. Trauma-based disorders are characterized by extreme fear, anxiety, depression, outbursts, flashbacks, or other symptoms that also could cause significant impairment. The most common trauma-based disorders are post-traumatic stress disorder, acute stress disorder, or adjustment disorders. And trauma-based disorders are primarily treatable with therapy. Some of the symptoms could be treated with medication, but the primary focus for resolution of trauma-based disorders is talk therapy. Life events where therapy can make a difference. There are lots of reasons someone might decide to go to therapy that have nothing to do with the diagnoses on the previous slide. Changes in life circumstances, retirement, divorce, job loss, death of a family member or friend, a serious health diagnosis, career change, empty nest. I have a college student, so I understand that feeling a little bit better now. Change in independence, chronic pain. Sometimes it's really hard to cope. Increased stress, childhood trauma that might be coming to the surface now. And there's so much more. Pretty much any life event could cause a disruption in your day-to-day functioning that therapy could help make a difference. And the common roadblocks that we see for folks choosing not to seek care is financial. So therapy is not inexpensive in all cases, and insurance does not always cover mental health services. So sometimes the out-of-pocket expenses can be relatively high. Accessibility, there are long waiting lists and difficulty getting to appointments. There is a lot of stigma and fear out there, concern over being judged for seeking help. Maybe someone's had a poor experience before and they tried either therapy or medication that didn't work well for them, and now they're hesitant to try again. And then the time commitment, the concern that therapy is a large amount of time that is needed in order to participate. And in order to overcome these roadblocks, if you are experiencing financial concerns, check with your insurance company and see if there are in-network options. And if not, there are many therapists that offer sliding fee scales. And so those can be found. A good place to look for those is needymeds.org is a great resource. You can put in your zip code and it will list all of the resources that do offer sliding fee scales. Accessibility. The rise of telehealth platforms that offer appointments the same week that can be held from the comfort of your home are really helping to erase some of the accessibility issues. Stigma and fear. Mental health conditions, as I said earlier, are no different than physical health conditions. You wouldn't tell someone not to treat their diabetes, so why would this be any different? Also, all mental health care is confidential. So I do want to stress that. Anyone who comes to see me, I can't even verify that they're my client. So sometimes that helps to alleviate some of the concerns. And also the telehealth platforms allow you to attend appointments from the privacy of your home. So no one has to see your car parked outside, for example, of a mental health clinic. Poor experience. So sometimes it takes a few tries to find the right therapist or medication that's a good fit for you. I always tell all of my clients that not everyone is a good fit for every person. You don't marry every person you date, for example. So if ever I am not a good fit for them, I will happily help them find someone who is a good fit. And most therapists will agree with this practice. And it is part of our ethics that we will help find referral sources for clients that don't feel like they fit well with us. And time. Therapy sessions are typically 45 to 60 minutes per week, and they only last until your goals are met. So you do not have to sign on for a lifetime of therapy if you don't choose to. I always tell my clients that my job is to work myself out of a job. So I will, ethically speaking, I will never keep anyone longer than in treatment longer than it is appropriate to do so, meaning that we are still working toward the goals that we set at the beginning of therapy or at some point during therapy. So therapy does not have to be a lifetime commitment. Typically, people can resolve lower impact issues or things like that in probably around 12 sessions. Sometimes things that stem back to childhood or some trauma-based issues may take longer than that. And when is a good time to seek help for mental health issues? And mental health symptoms can be recurring conditions within our lives, but they don't have to be long-term. If you're feeling like you can't manage symptoms, they're negatively impacting your daily functioning, or they're getting worse, it's important to seek help from a professional. and some resources. The National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, has wonderful resources for just information. They have support groups. They have support groups for caregivers, all sorts of things at NAMI. The United Way manages 211.org, and that is another one that you can put your zip code in, and it will help you find resources nearby. And Psychology Today keeps a listing of therapists by region or zip code. I don't know if it's zip code or state, but those the provider does have to pay for. So those would not be a comprehensive list. It would, but it does give you a good understanding of who might be available in your area. And finally, your insurance company is always a great place to start. And they can help direct you toward people that would be in person, providers that would be in, in network for you. And that's all I had for my prepared comments.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much. I think we have a few questions wrapped kind of around everything you just said, so we can just kind of flesh that out a little bit more. And again, feel free to keep putting questions in as we chat. But I know you mentioned like, when should I think about going to therapy, right? And that it's not, you don't necessarily, obviously for something traumatic that happens, that makes sense. But if you are starting to notice that normal functioning becomes difficult, that's also a good reason. What do you mean by like normal functioning? Like, are there specific signs that you would say you can tell that things are not quite, because sometimes they sneak up on you?
Sure, absolutely. I would say anything that lasts longer than, say, a week, that is a change from your normal functioning. So if you normally will be driving down the road and someone cuts you off and you're just fine and you're driving right along and you're like, oh man, you didn't like that, but you can roll with it. That would be your normal. But if all of a sudden you're finding yourself blowing up, you're finding yourself not able to handle something like that, that you're becoming angry or explosive, or if you think about it for a long time afterwards, and maybe cutting off in traffic wouldn't be one of those things, but say you're interacting with someone and you can't get past the interaction, that it just keeps ruminating and going through your head, and it's really impacting your ability to focus on other things. If you're having difficulty sleeping, or not being able to stop, get up. If you're being challenged, you're fatigued, you're having a hard time waking up in the morning, eating a lot, or not being able to eat at all. Those are all things that could be indicative that your functioning is being impacted by a mental health concern. If you know an incident has happened, for example, if you've lost had a recent loss of a family member, a friend, or a pet even, and you just can't get past it, and you feel like you're grieving longer than would be typical, those are all times that I would seek care.
Definitely. And like I said, sometimes it can sneak up on you. So kind of noticing, higher levels of irritation, or like things like you said, like where it's kind of starting you're starting to notice it. It's worth kind of looking more into what it could be.
Or if your family members are noticing. Sometimes we don't notice it within ourselves, but and we think we're hiding it, or we think we're coping well, but someone close to us might say, I've noticed you're really down lately. I'm really noticing that you're having a hard time doing what you used to do. That's a good indication too.
And I guess on that same point, I'm sure that, we all, well, I don't want to assume, but I'm sure there's, we've all kind of been through our own situations, but I'm sure we've also known someone who has been struggling as well. And so how would you suggest approaching them to have that conversation if you do notice that something might be a little bit off, or you think they might benefit from therapy because, they just went through something, kind of life-changing? How would you suggest bringing that up to them?
I think the first thing is to be non-judgmental. I think, as we spoke earlier, that's one of the roadblocks. People are worried about being judged. So if you can approach it very open-ended and saying, hey, how are you doing? How is it going? And if they're like, oh, fine. You're like, well, I've kind of noticed that you've not been yourself lately. And then opening it up that way. And if they're receptive, being open to you saying, I'm happy to listen, but I'm not a professional. and it might help you more if you sought services elsewhere. I mean, they could see a clergy member at their church if you know that they're really invested in their faith journey. And so they might feel more comfortable going to a synagogue or a church where they're already a member. It doesn't have to be a professional therapist, but we are here to help.
Yeah, and I think like you had mentioned some great resources, which I did put in the chat, but I will also share at the end as well for if you want to find support groups, whether it's for yourself and you're going through something in particular, or you are struggling with helping someone else that you love going through something. Finding a support group might be helpful to you if the idea of like one-on-one therapy might be a little intimidating to start with, right? It's like you can maybe start with a community first, and then if you feel like you want to continue on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I also want to mention that the National Suicide Hotline has a new number. So if anyone's not aware, it is now 988, and anyone can call that 24/7 from anywhere in the United States.
Awesome. Okay, so something I actually wanted to, when you mentioned low impact issues, I was curious what that actually means compared to what you would say higher impact, which I assume is something more, I don't want to say obvious, but like something like life-changing, like a death or, something a little more obvious.
Oh, sure. So I think for the person experiencing it, it might not feel low impact. So maybe I misspoke there a little bit, but it might be subclinical, meaning that you might not receive a diagnosis of major depressive disorder or generalized anxiety disorder. But we all get overwhelmed sometimes. And we really saw an increase of this when COVID happened because we were all so isolated, and there was concern and fear and confusion and a lot of things. And I think we're starting to get back into going into society as normal parts of our lives. But there's always that hidden fear almost of, for 3 years, we were so worried about being around people. I know myself, I get a little anxious sometimes when I'm in a crowd now because it makes you think twice. But those types of things, or if you're feeling overwhelmed and stressed and there's just a lot going on and you're carrying a big mental load of a lot of things to do, it doesn't have to be a big life event. It could be as simple as, oh my gosh, I have a ton to do all the time. And I'm not handling it the way I used to. I'm feeling like I don't know what to do next. I'm feeling, I had a client that used to say she would get analysis paralysis. She would have such a long list of things to do and she would just stare at it and not know where to start. So those are times that it might be helpful to go see a professional. And those are not things that would typically be super long-term for therapy either.
Right. And I think, and I know what you meant when you meant low impact. It was a little bit more, like you said, they might be kind of shorter circumstantial things versus something that's like a childhood trauma that you're working through, which is years and years of unpacking. So that makes a lot of sense. I guess something else that, because we are talking about destigmatizing and kind of removing roadblocks that we can remove at least. With things like anxiety, stress, we're obviously talking a lot more about it these days. We didn't used to kind of frame things in that way. I know post-traumatic stress is also something that is a relatively newer term and I mean that in like the last 50 years. Right. And I think there's also there can be these thoughts based on those diagnoses of like post-traumatic stress is only for people that have seen combat, or it's only for these specific situations. How do you think people can deal with maybe accepting that, or feeling like, well, I have a great life, why am I anxious? Like, and then almost shaming themselves into feeling that way. I feel like that can be quite a roadblock to seeking help, is thinking, what do I have to complain about? Or is it really this bad?
I think we tend to do that a lot, right? We minimize what we are experiencing ourselves because someone else can always be worse than us. That doesn't mean that you don't deserve care. That doesn't mean that you don't deserve to feel better and be able to function as optimally as you can. When it comes to PTSD and trauma, trauma is really insidious and it can impact a lot of different areas of our lives. And you don't have to reach the level of PTSD in order to experience the impact of trauma. But speaking of PTSD, it is either experiencing or witnessing severe traumatic events. So we have a bit of a collective PTSD, for lack of a better, collective trauma around things like 9/11, around things like the COVID epidemic and pandemic. So all of those things can add up. Something else about trauma is it's a little bit sneaky. So something that you experienced many, many, many years ago, you might be able to push it down and push it down and push it down. And eventually, though, it does work its way to the surface. And I always tell my clients, first of all, if your brain has unlocked a traumatic event enough to let it out and you're starting to experience it, that means that it feels like you're healthy enough and ready to deal with it. So the fact that something may have happened 50 years ago and now it's coming out, that means you're ready to deal with it. That means that your brain has let you deal with it. And so I don't want to say it's a good thing, but it doesn't have to be a terrible thing. It means you're ready, and you can work through it with a therapist. And then it just becomes a part of your past and doesn't have the gut punch feeling anymore when you think about it.
Right. And I think kind of along those same lines, we had a question come in asking, saying, I feel ashamed about going to therapy. How can I overcome that feeling?
That's a really hard one, because I think that certain cultures, certain generations have stigmatized care for mental health. And one way I really look at this is, would you shame someone for seeking care for diabetes? Would you shame someone for seeking care for, a broken foot? And everyone's like, well, of course not. That's not something I would do. And as I said, the brain is a part of the body. And some of these issues for mental health are chemical imbalances, just like diabetes is a chemical imbalance in the body. And some of them are life events. And we've proven time and time again, there's tons of research out there that the old way of, pushing it down and pulling yourself up by the bootstraps really in the long term doesn't work. It impedes development. It impedes you moving forward and living your fullest life. So while I understand the feelings and I understand where it came from, you don't have to feel that way. And it's okay if you do. And your therapist can help you work through it. And for example, I work at Cerebral, and one of the reasons I ended up on a telehealth platform, because I have 20 years in community mental health, in-person care. And then COVID hit and there was no in-person care. And my family had moved across the country. There was a lot of confluence of events. And so I ended up applying to Cerebral because I saw time and time again my clients being unable to get to appointments. They didn't have the time to drive to the appointment, have the appointment, and drive back home, some of them driving up to an hour to get there. And telehealth removes that. It allows you to access care from your home. And so all you have to do is pause for that 45 to 60 minutes and log in and then go about your day. So that's another option too. If you can access telehealth, no one has to see you going to the appointments.
Right. And it might feel just a little bit more accessible, not just because it is more accessible, as you don't have to physically get somewhere, but also just from like that mental roadblock of a place of, just kind of being like, I just have to click on, and, instead of the driving and getting there and kind of, the stress of the possible stress of kind of all the other feelings you're having, of course. Okay, just to back it up for a moment, because someone did ask this question as well. So one of the questions I wanted to ask was, does therapy actually help people? And so I'll ask that one first, and then I'm going to ask a little bit more specific after that. So I'll start with, has it been shown that it actually helps people?
Yes. According to the American Psychological Association, 70% of people who access therapy report significant improvement in their symptoms. I will also say that the best predictor of whether or not therapy is going to be successful relies on the strength of the relationship with the therapist. So this goes back to what I was saying earlier. If it's not a good fit for you, it's okay to say that. It's okay to say, I don't feel like we're really clicking. Can you help me find someone with whom I can work more closely, or, openly, or however you want to phrase it? And that's okay, because it's your care and it's you that is needing to feel better. So you won't be hurting the therapist's feelings at all.
Yeah, and I think you had mentioned that earlier as well. And I think that's I know I had that question as well, where it's like, am I supposed to, like, I don't know if I'm it's not that I didn't like the therapist, but it's like, if things are just not clicking, it's like a regular relationship, like you said. And we talk a lot in our webinars here about, if a doctor isn't listening to you, or you don't feel like you're getting the right, health care, it's the same thing for mental health as well. If you feel like it's just not working, or you don't feel like they're listening, or whatever it is, go find someone else. Like, it needs to work for you. You don't need to pick the first person that you have.
Right. Absolutely. And it also, you have to be able to connect with the person. Over my many years as a therapist, I've had clients say, I like you as a person, but I really want to talk to, a Black gay male. I'm like, yeah, I'm not your person. Let me help you find someone who is. I have not lived that experience. And they needed that to be able to address the issues they were coming to address. So I think it's important to do that. If you're looking for someone who has a shared life experience with you, or if you're looking for someone who definitely has parented children before, or if you're looking for someone who, is of your faith, there are lots of reasons why you might want to seek a specific therapist. And that's okay. There's lots of us out there, and we all just want the best for our clients. So I will do whatever I need to do to help someone find the person that's the best fit for them.
Yeah, that's great. And I remember during COVID, there was obviously a lot more conversations about therapy. And there were so many articles about, like, how you break up with your therapist. I think everyone was kind of like, I don't know if this is working. And it started to become more of a conversation. And obviously, like you said, it hopefully shouldn't be a big deal if you're talking to your therapist. Hopefully it's not, but it's completely normal if you move through a couple therapists until you find the one that you like. That doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong.
Absolutely not. And you want to be with someone that you feel like you can open up. So if you're not feeling like you can share things with them, it takes time. Nobody's going to come to a first therapy session and just lay it all out there. I understand that. But if you've met a couple of times and you just don't feel like you can open up to the person, that's a pretty good indicator that it's not a good fit.
Yeah. Okay, so the second part of that question with, does therapy actually work, is I guess this is more about the types of therapy that might work for you. So this particular person said that just talking about my issues doesn't help.
Right.
Should I expect it to suggest things? I feel this question because I also don't feel like just talking helps me. I can talk enough, but I I think that that's a common thing where it's like, do I just have to go in and talk? Is that the only type of therapy there is?
Oh, absolutely not. So the other thing is, if you feel like you're just sitting there chatting like you would with a friend or a parent or whomever, that's really not effective. Therapy isn't supposed to be just a conversation. There's all kinds of therapy. So CBT works with helping to confront cognitive distortions, confront the ways we look at things, and reframe them into more appropriate ways to process through. So by changing your thoughts, you can change your emotions and change your behaviors. DBT is a dialectical behavior therapy, is an offshoot of CBT, and it looks to find balance and accepting emotions as they are, but then also working past them. EMDR works great for trauma and trauma-based issues. I will caution, EMDR requires a special certification, so sometimes it's a little bit harder to find an EMDR therapist. But there are a wide range of modalities and interventions that therapists use to help clients based on what their needs are. So if you feel like you're just sitting around a coffee table and chatting, it probably is not effective therapy.
Right. And I think that that's something that is not often talked about is that I think people just think therapy is lying on the couch and talking the whole time. Because that's kind of what's been shown, and I think learning that for some people, just talking is not helpful because that might be part of where the anxiety comes from, is the kind of constant, like work talking through something. So there are other types of therapy. If somebody wanted to kind of look more into that, what would you suggest a resource if they wanted to look at those different types of therapies?
So NAMI, NAMI.org
Okay.
has a list, and also the APA.org. You can search there and it'll show you a bunch of different lists of types of therapy. And most therapists will list in their biography what modality that they use.
Amazing. Okay, I'll make sure to put those links in the chat box as well for everyone. Okay, so then somebody just asked, the pandemic has increased my anxiety, understandable. In getting help, do the professionals help their clients cope with anxiety, or do they seek to heal it? That's a great question.
Yeah, so I'm going to back up just a little bit. Something that I tell my clients is anxiety serves a purpose. As with all emotions, there's a reason why humans feel anxiety. And the the reason is it's so that it alerts us to danger. So feeling some anxiety in certain situations is not only normal, it's not maladaptive at all. It's totally appropriate. When it becomes outsized is when it becomes problematic. So going to therapy will, number one, help you get it back in the box, right? Get it back to the normal level where, there are certain times if you are driving down the road and you witness somebody almost get hit by a car, your heart rate's going to go up. You're going to get nervous. You're going to, and that is a normal expected response. We don't want to get rid of that entirely. What we want to do is get it back to the point where if you're still thinking about that a week later and you can't move forward, and that's the kind of thing we want to work on. So what I would say is the goal of therapy is, number one, to learn to cope with anxiety when it occurs, but also get it back into the normal range. Like most everything is on a spectrum and there's a range. We want to get your anxiety down to where it's within normal limits. But I will never, and if anyone promises they can take away your anxiety, they're not telling you the truth. And you don't want that anyway. You want to experience the normal range of emotions.
Is this where that like fight or flight mentality comes in, where it's like you want the ability to have the fight or flight because that's human instinct, but you don't want to constantly be in that heightened state?
Correct.
All at all times, right? Okay.
Absolutely.
Yes, no, that's not good for us. Speaking of, someone did ask, how can I deal with things happening in the news? Oof, yeah, it leaves me feeling down, like things are never going to change, and it's frightening. Totally understand this, and I'm sure it's not helpful that the news is 24/7 now as well. But how would you suggest in terms of like things that you can't? I mean, we can't control most things, but things like news or things that are happening and you hear it happening in your own neighborhood or your own city, like how can you, that's obviously going to make you feel a certain way, but like how can you deal with that on a daily basis?
Absolutely. So a couple of things. First of all, step away from the 24-hour news cycle. I know my parents are retired now and they have the news on in the background all the time. And when I go over there, I'm like, you got to turn this off. I can't do this. I've made the decision for myself that I will consume news on my terms. So find the places that you trust to get reliable news, whether that be on, in a written newspaper form, whether it be on like an app or something that you want, or even the TV, but limit it. It doesn't need to be on 24/7. Maybe you'll decide that you want to watch 2 news programs a day. Or maybe you want to watch 1 news program and read, I don't know, 30 minutes or whatever. Put limits on it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the locus of control. So there's all these things, if you were to look at circles, like these are all the things that are happening. And then the little circle in the middle is what we can control ourselves, and put your energy into what you can control. So if that means you've seen in the news that there's been a lot of break-ins in your area, you might want to look at, a Ring doorbell, or you might want to look at a security system, or make sure your windows and doors are locked, and that sort of thing. Those are all rational, normal responses. Or get involved in a neighborhood watch. Put your energy into what you can control, and the rest of it, I don't want to say just let it go, because it is concerning, but keep in mind what you are able to do, and keep it in an informational level, and maybe not so much becoming emotionally invested in every single thing.
Yeah, and it's also, we always say this, but like the news doesn't really report on good stuff most of the time. So you're it's always, for the most part, is going to be something negative. And so you're, like you said, you can't control what's happening, but you can control how much you're taking in. And I know for me, I have like
to it. Too.
And how you respond. Yeah. I have a daily newsletter that I get, and that's pretty much all I can handle. So kind of my limit is
I had to stop myself. I used to kind of be a news junkie, and I had to put limits as well. Because I noticed my blood pressure was rising.
It's true. Yeah. And I think if you are someone who also uses app for information, you can, I don't know about Androids, but I know for iPhones, you can set limits for how long the app is actually open. So I imagine something like that can be helpful if sometimes you go down the rabbit hole and you don't realize how long you've been looking at something. So hopefully that will help too. Okay, so a little bit more on the actual kind of different mental disorders and things that you talked about. And I like that you put it into those different groups, because I think that sometimes they all get kind of meshed into something, and it's helpful to kind of see it in those buckets. But someone asked, is there any genetic research that shows a tendency towards anxiety disorders, especially social anxiety and agoraphobia?
Not as specific to social anxiety and agoraphobia, but there have been studies showing genetic components to a lot of mental health conditions.
That's so interesting. So if you like a predisposition, would you say to something, if there's something in your family, let's just say if there's like bipolar disorder in your family, I obviously don't want to get too in the weeds, but if that's something that you already know of that's in your family, would you want to almost proactively seek help, or do you think that's just it's just information to know? Like, how would you recommend handling that information?
I would say it's information to know, but also it's kind of like cancer can run in families, right? So if you know that you have cancer in your family and you notice something odd going on with you, you might be more likely to seek care sooner. I would say the same thing for mental health. It's not predictive. So they have shown correlations, but it doesn't mean that just because a parent or a grandparent or a cousin has a mental illness, it doesn't mean that you're automatically going to, but there might be a predisposition. And that is something that we usually ask at intake. So when someone comes in, that's one of the things I ask is there a history of mental health concerns in your family? Because there is a correlation. Just like, diabetes, I keep going back to diabetes, but it's so similar because it is a chemical imbalance. So just like that can run in families, so can mental health concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. This just came to me too, because I know a lot of people who are going through different life changes, whether it's, it doesn't have to be negative, right? It's like you have a baby, like that's a very positive life experience, but it can add anxiety and stress and all those things as well. Do you suggest that if someone, and maybe it's not necessarily a birth, but like if someone, if you're going to be retiring, or you're dealing with a partner who might be ill, like if you know that things are going to almost become more challenging or different, not necessarily negative, but different, do you recommend kind of going to therapy in almost, like I keep saying, proactive way, but knowing that there's going to be a change coming? Is that something you recommend as well?
Absolutely. There is a modality. I mean, we talked about different types of therapy called solution-focused brief therapy. And that usually takes like 8 to 12 sessions. Like it's really a brief period of time. And if you're going to have a huge life event and you're not exactly sure how you might handle it, go for it. Do some problem solving, do some planning, have some coping skills ready in your toolbox in case things happen. You don't always have to be reactive to situations. But as you said, a birth, an adoption, a huge move across the country, any of those things could cause feelings of turmoil. And if you want to get proactive about it, I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, and also when you're saying moving, like downsizing, the empty nest or downsizing from a home you've lived in for 40 years, or those are all large life-changing events, and so it makes sense if you're feeling all types of emotions, and you can feel multiple things at once as well. So that's a normal
Yeah.
it's a normal
I mean,
reaction.
most people don't go to therapy because they're super happy. But it doesn't mean that you're not excited about it either. Same thing with a career change. It can also help you just sort out your thoughts and feelings about it. There's a graphic out there, and I wish I had put it in the slideshow, that I really like. It shows the person going to therapy, and their thoughts all look like a big old jumble of different colors of yarn. And then they're talking to the therapist, and it's getting woven into like 3 different yarn balls, like all sorted out. That's exactly what therapy can do. It can help you sort through your thoughts and emotions and come up with coherent plans and help you plan.
Right. Kind of on that same note, we did have a question come in during registration that asked, in terms of like kind of this shift that wasn't expected. They wrote that, and I don't want to get like too into it. I don't know if they wanted me to share all of it, but basically they're talking about their husband who was, before they were married, he was very active and healthy, and they were constantly doing things. And he has been recently diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, and life has become more difficult. And this person was not quite sure what to expect and how to act, and they're not a caregiver and doesn't know. A lot of it is the kind of unknown of what their new normal is going to be and where to go for help. And so I imagine there's a lot of stress, and again, not to put this in their in their mind, but I think what they're asking is that kind of how can I kind of start dealing with this for me, and not so much like, I'm sure they want their partner to also find ways to cope as well, but it sounds like for that they're not quite sure how to cope. So is that where something like a support group or something like that, or even just one-on-one therapy, like, do you think that's something where they could get some help?
Absolutely. I would say either or both. Places like NAMI do have support groups for caregivers. But also if there is a specific condition, if it is something like Alzheimer's, I know there are support groups for partners and family members of individuals with Alzheimer's, or just individual therapy. It does, like I said, it doesn't even have to be a long-term thing, but any huge life change like that, it sounds like that's going to have a huge impact. So you might feel better if you go talk to someone and better understand how you're feeling. And it's okay if you're upset. This isn't in what was expected. This wasn't in the plan early on. So working through those emotions can be helpful, both for the individual that wrote in, but also for the partner. If the partner is cognitively able to go to therapy, it might be helpful for them to come to an acceptance of what to be expected and how they're feeling. And I'm sure they're confused as well. So, or unsure of how to feel or unsure what's coming and that kind of thing. So I think therapy is always a good idea.
Yeah, and like you said, there's kind of a jumble of emotions, those different, piles of yarn that I can visualize. And so there's obvious like frustration, maybe even anger, mourning, there's a lot of things, and the therapist is there to help you specifically sort those out. And again, whether it's in a group of people who are also understanding of what you're going through, or if it is a one-on-one therapist, they're there to kind of help you through that transition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and we also, I'll share this with that person as well, but we had a webinar recently about finding resilience when dealing with or helping someone deal with like a chronic illness, and there was a lot and that was very specific about kind of what you can do for yourself, what you can do for your partner, whoever you're caring for, And she kind of dives a little bit into that as well. So, you know, we have some resources here as well, but there's lots of people out there who can hopefully help. Okay, so you already mentioned, what if I don't like my therapist, which is, you know, obviously trying to find someone else. Someone did ask, you know, they didn't have positive experiences with their mental health care. The therapist, they saw a couple therapists, they didn't connect with them for different reasons. And then they said, in going to medical center clinics, I saw someone in training who then left when the educational period ended. Is that a common thing, or have you noticed that that's something that's just from your kind of professional side? Has anything changed since then, or have you noticed that kind of a common thing when someone's in like an educational training?
Yeah, it can happen. So for therapists in particular, usually have to do a practicum that is a shorter period of time, but then an internship, like I had to do a 1,000-hour internship, but then that is time limited. And then after that, you work for 2 years under supervision. And then after that, you become fully independently licensed. And so those time periods are all times when therapists could change jobs, because they are trying to maybe go into private practice that you can't do until you are fully licensed, or that sort of thing.
So would you recommend, if someone is looking for kind of a more longer term therapist, and I guess it's kind of hard to say, but we're just letting it all out today, but
Sure.
would you maybe recommend not going to someone who's in training because they're most likely going to move on? Or is that kind of a really drastic generalization?
It really depends. I think if they're in their internship, I would be upfront. Well, even if they're beyond the internship and in under supervision, I think that's just a question you can ask. You know, like in that first session, look, I noticed, you know, because there usually is an informed consent that you would have to sign if the person's not fully licensed. And you can say, does this mean you're going to be leaving within X period of time? It's okay to ask that. You know, it's okay to say, I'm really looking for a long-term relationship with a therapist. And so I want to find someone who's a good fit for me for that reason. And they should be able to tell you. I mean, no one can guarantee, like, you know, I moved across the country because my husband's job moved us. So sometimes things happen, but if you know someone's planning to leave after a period of time, that would be a good thing to know if you're looking for something more long-term.
Yeah, I think that's great. Like, just kind of ask the question up front, and again, they might not know for sure, but it might just be good to ask in case they do. So, and again, there's a few resources I put in the chat, but I'll make sure to put them in again for finding other therapists. You know, it doesn't, unfortunately, for sometimes it can take a few to find one, and that's nothing to do with you or them. It's just kind of like you said before, it's like anything else. If it's not working, it's not working. And so I'll make sure to put in other resources as well, because if you're only, for example, if you've only been going through your insurance, maybe it's helpful to find a different avenue to seek therapy or therapist, because maybe you're looking for something else.
I will add one caveat that most people don't know, and it can be jarring if you're not aware. If you have Medicare or Medicaid or any other government payer, you can only seek care from therapists who are in network with Medicare or Medicaid. So, for example, Cerebral, where I work, does not, we're not in network with any federal payers. So unfortunately, we have to refer out in that case. So I think that is the one caveat to that, is if you are going to be using Medicare or Medicaid, please make sure that you're checking with them to make sure that your the clinician is someone that you're able to see.
And do you know, or is telehealth normally, and again, this might be a question for Medicare, Medicaid, but do you know if that's like generally telehealth in general is covered with Medicare, Medicaid, or is that based on the state?
Yeah, some places are, but they have very specific criteria that you have to meet in order to be able to take that insurance. And it is just one of the regulations that someone who has that insurance cannot pay out of pocket to go to someone who's not within that network. So that's not an us rule. That's not a therapist rule. That is a federal regulation. So I just want to put that out there so that someone doesn't get surprised, because that's not a good experience for the client or the clinician at that point.
No, absolutely. Appreciate that. We have time for a few more questions. So if you do have any in, feel free to drop them in. I think one question that came up in terms of also the roadblocks is, or mental roadblocks is, am I too old for therapy? Is it too late for me to seek help in feeling better?
Absolutely not. So I personally have seen clients as young as 3 all the way up to, I think my oldest client was in her 80s. But it's never too late. If you want to feel better, if you want your life to feel more fulfilled and feel like you're able to function at an optimal level, go for it. It's never too late.
And like you said, it's something, like you said, some people think they have to be in it forever. But that's not the goal of, I mean, it depends on what you're going for and the things that you're working on. But I know you said that your goal as a therapist is to make sure that people aren't there longer than they need to.
Absolutely. Yeah. My job is to work myself out of a job. I want my clients to feel better. And something else to consider is therapy generally starts out as once a week. But after a period of time, if you've started to meet your goals, but you're not quite ready to leave entirely, you can do a step down. So you could do like every other week for a period of time, or maybe once a month, so that you can make sure that you're practicing the skills that you learned, and still have a little bit of support. And then you can transition out of therapy. And then you can always come back if you ever need to.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just because you end it doesn't mean you can never go back. It's always there. Okay, so I think one of the last questions that I know people have asked in the past is, will my therapist judge me for my thoughts? Because sometimes we can have sometimes we can have terrible thoughts. So
I can say for sure that will not happen. And we all sign codes of ethics, whether you're a counselor, a social worker, a marriage and family therapist. And part of that is unconditional positive regard for your clients. So there's no judgment. And believe me, I have really heard it all. Not much shocks me anymore. Nothing embarrasses me. I have had clients talk about all sorts of things. And so I think that our goal, people don't become therapists in order to be judgmental. I think we become therapists to help people. And if we're judging our clients, we're not going to be in it very long because clients won't stay with us. So I personally can say that I don't feel judgment toward my clients in any way. And I would say the majority of therapists feel the same way.
yeah, so I think sometimes we worry that our thoughts are not, and I mean, there's obviously, I'm generalizing as well, but like we worry that if we happen to have negative thoughts, then something's wrong with us. But it's very much, the brain works in a lot of different ways. And so talking about it and feeling open to kind of say even things that you feel, oh God, I can't believe, even just saying it makes me feel uncomfortable. That's part of therapy, is kind of like getting to the root of why you might be feeling that way.
And I have a bracelet around here somewhere. I don't know where it went, but it says therapy is brave. And I truly believe that. Anyone who is willing to come and talk and open up to someone is brave, and they're taking the steps they need to feel better. And so right there, they've already earned my respect for being willing to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I think we have just a few more minutes, but is there anything else, Christine, that you feel that kind of mental health gets stigmatized and keeps people? I know we talked about financial as well, but hopefully I did share was it needymeds.org?
Yeah, needymeds.org.
I shared that. I love that name. I shared that in the chat. So if you are looking for like the sliding scale therapist, and I believe I had something, I'll find it in a minute, but I think there was something I had shared in the past that was like a New York specific, finding someone. But sliding scale, if it is financial, Medicare. Oh, someone did ask, is there a reason why Medicare and Medicaid are not accepted? And that's at many places. And I think, like you had said, that's a federal, that's a federal government question. Unfortunately, right. I wish I knew more health insurance in general seems to, that's a whole
There
other
are
webinar.
some bills in Congress right now that they are trying
Oh,
to
good.
expand. So let's keep our fingers crossed. Mental health parity, if you hear those words, that's working toward expansion in those programs. So there's
Amazing.
that. And I guess the one thing I would leave you with is you are worth it. That I would keep that at the forefront. Even if you're worried about being judged or by someone else, not your therapist, or whatever it is, it's okay. You are worth it. It's worth putting in the effort so that you can feel better and be able to function at your most, your best self.
I love that. I love that. I think on that note, we'll wrap it up. I'm going to share, I did put the needy meds in here, but I'm going to, someone just asked for that as well. So we'll make sure that you get that info. And I'm not sure where Kara was supposed to come on for Circle of Care, but if you have any questions about Circle of Care, I'm not sure if she's going to make it on right now, but I will link that info in here as well. Because if you do have any questions, you can call the hotline for Circle of Care. Again, that's another resource. If you are a caregiver, you know, you're dealing with all of a sudden having to take care of someone, the Circle of Care program is wonderful through PSS. It offers kind of someone to listen to you. Again, it's not like the therapist, but it's kind of that community that Christine was talking about that you can find already here, just to kind of help you connect with someone, connect with resources. They might be able to help find you someone as well. So I'll put that info in the chat as well. I also put the APA. Trying to see what else we had. NAMI.org I put in here, lots of good stuff. And I also put the webinar on the resilience with chronic illness, if that is something you want to check out. So I think that was it. Was that everything that you can think of, Christine?
Yeah, another good one is 211.org. And that's the United Way website. And you can find all kinds of things on there. You can find senior resources, you can find resources for people who are blind, people who are deaf, people who need housing, people, you know, all kinds of things, and it's tailored to your area.
Amazing. All right, I'll put that in here. All right, make sure you all have all the info. Amazing. Okay, well, I think that's it. So Christine, thank you so much for coming and chatting with our group and answering our questions. And you know, if anybody has any questions after the fact, you feel free to reach out to me, and we'll kind of help answer anything that we may not have gotten to. But I think I got to everyone's question, so that's always a good sign. But yeah, thank you so much, Christine, and we really appreciate you taking the time. Yeah, and thank you everyone for asking your questions and for being open to ask questions. We love that. It's all about keeping it open. So this will be this is recorded, so this will be on our YouTube page probably later in the week, so you can rewatch this if you missed anything or want more info. But in the meantime, yeah, just thank you so much again, Christine, and everyone else for coming, and we will see you all in the next one.
Bye everybody.
Right. Bye everyone, have a good week.